Meeting is streaming live. There we go.
Streaming live. I know, just look. I imagine if you had boots or something and were walking around in there, your boots would be pretty chopped up by the
Oh,
time.
chopped to
It's got to be
ribbons.
like sharp and, I mean, nothing's smoothed over here, you know?
Oh no. Oh no. There's no
It's just,
we don't understand how much erosion and weather and the water cycle and wind smooth everything out and polish things.
oh, yeah.
And it doesn't even look like the moon. The moon has had enough pounding in the inner solar system that it has this regolith that's been pounded to dust. And
Right.
we realize, oh, only craters that are most of them less than 1 billion years old on the moon survive. Older things have been literally from it's so bizarre. You think that, oh, here's a 10-kilometer crater, yeah, with a rim that goes up half a kilometer above the level plane, and over 1 billion years, just mostly little pebbles and sand grain size things just eroded all flat.
Yeah.
Uh, but of course, on Earth, that erosion rate is tremendously faster. But on Bennu, it's virtually zero. So you just see these lumps, and in the low gravity, they just sort of drift together and stick.
hmm
It's
Now,
all
these
slow motion.
asteroids, Daniel, are they just like, I mean, is it just like gravel? I mean, is it really kind of anything very solid? I mean, I see some
No,
big rocks. Like that piece right there looks like it's
it looks
melted
like
or
a great big
something.
rock, but it's not. We realized that with accretion process in planets, planets have to get to around 1,000 kilometers before you get compression,
Yeah,
where the planet becomes effectively spherical. And not only that, but the interior gets hot enough that you start to get some metamorphic processes that fuse materials together. Bennu is relatively tiny. It hasn't the gravity, it hasn't the internal pressure to generate the heat to create any sort of a chemical transformation in the rocks.
yeah.
There's no process on Bennu is energetic enough to create bonding with planets the size of Mars and Earth. Radio, radioactive elements deep within their radiation becomes heat, and because the planet is big enough that he's effectively trapped and raises temperatures until the point where rocks become plastic, where rocks metamorphically begin to evolve. And on something tiny like Bennu, relatively tiny, and I don't know how big Bennu is off the top of my head, um, kilometer or two, I think, not a lot bigger. um, it's in the under 10-kilometer size, I believe.
Let's
Um,
see.
can you look that up?
Well, look, 101955 Bennu. Um, has a radius of 861.22 feet.
Wow, a radius in feet. Okay.
Is that right?
Okay, yeah, that sounds right. That's under 1,000.
So this is
That's 800 feet would be about 300 meters? No. Yeah. Yeah, that'd be about right. 8 divided by 3, 250, 300 meters, something like that. It's not that big. And the
geez.
gravity is virtually zero, um, which is why when they tried a lander on Bennu, the damn thing just kept bouncing.
Bouncing around. Right.
And there was some plan at some point, and I don't know if it was the lander on Bennu. They planned to shoot some kind of grapples that would go in and penetrate and hang on, like harpoon the whale, Mr. Starbuck.
Oh, and then
But
drag
it didn't
itself
work.
in or something? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
yeah. I think and this may work in future. You may, but I think it's going to have to be more energetic, where you're going to take some kind of a barbed missile and attached to a grappling wire. And and I would think ideally you would have three, and then you would boom shoot them down in, and then you would ratchet the wires down, and then gradually you could bring yourself down in a preferred orientation. But yeah, something like this, I mean, the gravity, something that small, you could launch yourself into orbit. A couple of
jump
steps,
and just take off like Superman down the rock. Okay.
Yeah. It would be interesting, whatever the escape velocity is of Bennu, but it's a couple of meters per second. It's very slow.
This is interesting about Bennu here. It says the boulders contain veins of high albedo carbonate minerals believed to have been formed prior to the formation of the asteroid due to hot water channels. Channels on the much larger parent body. The veins range from 3 to 15 centimeters wide and can be over 1 meter in length, much bigger than carbonate veins seen in meteorites.
And that's really interesting.
There's lots of stuff going on in these asteroids.
Oh, yes. And so that water vein environment. There you go. There's your self-assembly. Well, the biomolecules couldn't assemble on an asteroid. Well, yes, actually, there's water there. And once they're made, if the water goes away or sublimates away, the biomaterials remain because they're much bigger molecules, so they're much harder to vaporize off a surface. Much harder. And we see that on Mars. If you take a look at the water ice on Mars, the water ice is rich in deuterium. Why? Because adding another neutron, right? One more neutron. Water has an atomic weight of about 18.1. You add a neutron, you're 19.1. Just that one more neutron makes it that much harder to sublimate and get it into space. And so deuterium water, heavy water, if you will, is enriched on Mars because lightweight water is more easily lost into space. It drifts into the atmosphere, it gets hit by a UV ray or gamma ray, and it gets energetic. And more energy means a higher orbit, and eventually it gets too far away. Mars gravity cannot hold it, and it drifts away, and Mars leaves a vapor trail, if you will, just like a jet engine does in the upper atmosphere when we watch them going by and we see, ooh, look, a contrail. Well, Mars itself leaves a contrail, much thinner,
but
it does indeed.
Do, I guess. I mean,
all planets do. That's right.
They think some of the water ice on the moon is from Earth's atmosphere.
Correct.
So it's just incredible. Right. So probably all over. I mean, the stuff that has been blown away or is sublimating or however it's being outgassed or dusting, dust flying into space.
And
the whole solar system must be just mixed with
wherever everything. There's a lot more interchange of materials between the planets than anyone would have given credit for 25 or 50 years ago.
Right.
If you had said 50 years ago, Apollo era, mind you, oh, there's a fair amount of water on the moon's south pole and most of it is from Earth, you would have been laughed out of the room.
You would have been laughed out of the room.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No one would take you serious for a heartbeat. Mm. Well, look at what the kooks, from Explorer in the University of Arkansas is. Go away, kids. We're professionals here. We'll take it from here. And the idea that you could I have in my collection, I have a meteorite from the Martian surface. I have a meteorite from the lunar surface. And you just think, here's a piece of another planet.
Right.
That got, bam, there was a big hit. Chunks flew off. And once they're in space is not forever. It's kind of like goofy golf, right? Where's the next gravity well? Where's the next sinkhole that eventually you're going to fall into? And the sinkholes don't stay. So they don't stay put. So you can't find a stable corner the sinkholes are orbiting the sun and moving,
Mm-hmm.
and these gravity wells are swirling around, and it's just a matter of time before you're going to fall into one if you're this orbiting particle. By particle, I mean anything up to a few hundred meters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, goodness. Something like Bennu will eventually get nudged and bumped, and one of two things. It will either get bumped out of the solar system and enter the interstellar environment, or if it falls in, there's a lot more planets, a lot more densely packed. That's one thing that I have students make models of the solar system. So we make scale models. Sun's a basketball, Jupiter's a ping pong ball, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune are marbles. The Earth is basically a pea, and the Moon and Mercury are little 2-millimeter beads. Pluto is a grain of salt. And so you go, oh, okay. And we start walking. Okay, we go about 19 meters, and here's Mercury. And then we go about 25 meters, and here's Venus. And then we hit about 39 meters, and there's the Earth. And then we go about 45 meters, and there's Mars. And then we go all the way out 250 meters, and there's Jupiter. And we hit 500 meters, and there's Saturn. And we hit 775 meters, and there's Uranus. And you're walking this, right? So you've got a pedometer and you're walking this, and we go, oh, look back there. And inevitably someone will say, well, look how close all the inner planets are. Yes, Mars is only 50 million miles away on average, on a good day. Venus is closer than that. Mars and Mercury are about the same distance. The Moon, that's stumble over that. That's, just a tiny bit
You'll
away.
trip over that one.
Yeah. So you go, oh yeah, sure we can have exchange of material from one to the other.
Right.
Sure we can.
Well, knowing that everything's out there, and probably everything to build life on any planet that'll have it,
I have great confidence scientifically in the bio-self-assembly, in the self-assembly hypothesis to begin with, and in bio-self-assembly as a subset of that. I had great confidence that these are reasonable hypotheses, very hard to test because they require cosmological lengths of time. Although we're starting to think not so much anymore, but still, even if life appeared within less than 100 million years after the continent, that's still you're going to find a hard time getting a grant for an experiment that runs that length of time.
Right.
And you think to yourself, well, but it has to occur at some instant, right? At some instant, this will occur. And I suppose, like many YouTubers have proven, all you have to do is have your camera at the right place in the right time. Instant viral video, YouTube gold. And there's lots of websites that do crazy driver dash cam videos because somebody had their dash cam on at the right time. A lot of the Chelyabinsk meteor video is from dash cams.
Oh yeah, a good portion of it. That's
yep,
right.
Good portion of it is from dash cams.
We'll go ahead and get started here. So here
Let's do.
My name is Jason Dworkin. I'm the director of the Astrobiology Analytical Laboratory at NASA Goddard. I'm also the project scientist for OSIRIS-REx. We're interested in studying the origin and evolution of life on the Earth and other bodies in the solar system from the perspective of understanding simple organic chemistry. We don't understand what happened in the ancient Earth. Most of that record is lost by subduction and other geochemical processes. However, meteorites and the asteroid Bennu witnessed the chemistry of the early solar system. A problem with studying meteorites is that they invariably land on the ground. They land in ice in Antarctica, for example, or in dirt or soil, and life very rapidly contaminates these samples. By going to collect the samples from an asteroid, we can keep the samples pristine by having very tight controls over what the spacecraft is made out of and how it's returned and archived and distributed around the world. OSIRIS-REx is a NASA mission which launches in 2016 and goes to the near-Earth asteroid Bennu, which is a organic-rich, very dark, primitive asteroid. Orbits the asteroid for about a year, studies it in great detail, and then collects a sample and returns it to the Earth for worldwide distribution and study. Samples from Bennu return to Earth in 2023. They land at the UTTR facility in Utah, then are transported to the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Any scientist in the world can write a proposal to request some sample and justify what they'll get from it. The Bennu samples will contain riches which can be studied today and are in many ways beyond technology right now to study. For example, in this laboratory, we've been studying samples brought back by the Apollo missions. The analysis is being performed by a woman who was not born yet when the samples were returned, using instrumentation that was not designed, asking questions not thought possible. This is the value of sample return. It's a gift to the Earth that keeps giving generation after generation as technology is advanced and as new people come up with new questions that we're not smart enough now to think about.
Hello everyone, this is Scott Roberts with Explore Scientific and the Explore Alliance, and you're watching the 45th episode of How Do You Know? Daniel and I have been talking in the background there about asteroids and the self-assembly of life and all kinds of things that have to do with our solar system. But I'm going to let Daniel come on now, and we will talk about the stuff that might be locked in many asteroids.
Hey, Scott, welcome, everybody. Exciting to be here again. Thank you for tuning in and inviting us into your homes. We're continuing. This is our third program in the astrobiology series, and we do this every once in a while. We pick a topic, and mostly this is stuff that fascinates yours truly. I'll just get into this. Oh, I'll do a program on this. Wow, this is really fascinating. We could do 2, we could do 3. Yay. I very much understand Newton when he said, I feel like a child on the shore going, ooh, shiny. I'll look at this one. I'll look at that one. A friend of mine refers to this as the shiny object problem. He's retired. He has more than he can possibly get done. And he says, Dan, it's just a shiny object problem. I see something and I go, ooh, that looks fun. Or I see something, this needs to be done. And it grabs his attention. And he says, the waggy object you see there in the corner of the camera is my dog Bunter, has come into the studio. So today we're going to talk about nucleotides and bases. We have some cool opening comments that kind of help us with this for today. One of the coolest things, guys, if you take a look at Jumping Robot, and there's a link in the show notes if you download this, there's a link there. They've invented, and I believe it's folks in San Diego, have invented this jumping robot. It's less than a foot tall, and it jumps 33 feet. So it's basically 30 centimeters tall and jumps to 100 meters, which is nuts. What's interesting is they went and looked at biological systems. They said, how do kangaroos jump? How do rabbits jump? How do grasshoppers jump? How do fleas jump? Fleas are some of the most prodigious jumpers. And they take a look at how these insects, animals jump. And they said, can we do better? And so they designed this cool robot with new materials. And they said, what we can do is we can have synthetic materials, which are super strong. And we can have this motor, this tiny, tiny motor that compresses the spring and adds more and more energy. It takes a long time to wind this thing up. Jumping animals like a grasshopper doesn't have the leisure to crank up and wind his legs for half an hour on the chance that he'll be ready when a bird comes by.
Yeah, he'll be eaten before then.
It'll get eaten, right? That would be an anti-evolutionary thing. So they had advantages, but they said, oh, with this robot, we can design this robot. It jumps 100 meters on Earth in Earth's gravity. Well, okay, what if you put this thing on the moon? Well, 1/6 gravity means this crazy thing could jump 600 meters. It could jump half a mile in the air. Oh, you want to get over there? Fine, roll over, tilt, get ready, set your camera pointing down, burn, off you go. It's really fascinating stuff. And we think about, Scott and I were talking about.
I guess if it was on Bennu, it would just launch.
Right, exactly. On Bennu, this thing would go into orbit.
Right.
And the idea is that you could set the springs and whatever for whatever environment. On Mars, you talk about the helicopter, which has motors and all sorts of aerodynamics. If you had this hopper on Mars, this thing would jump 300 meters. So it's jumping up 1/4 of a mile, aim it that way, and this ballistic trajectory. And it would go and land. It would be able to land and reorient itself. This thing would be fabulous. And the power requirements compared to the helicopter would be tiny. Now, it's not controlled flight. It's not controlled flight,
right,
but it's awesome flight. Just kapow, like out of a cannon. And the other thing, and I'm going to share a photo here with everybody for a second, Scott. And this is a photo. The Webb telescope is now in full focus. There's a video, and Scott's going to put a link to it in the chat.
Video. Yes.
You want to take a look at this video, friends. It is just stunning. You see, oh, here's the WISE telescope from about 20 years ago, the Spitzer from about 10 years ago, and now you see Webb. And if you look at these three photos, you're seeing the same scene from different telescopes. And the first one looks like somebody with really bad astigmatism looking through, a cheap telescope with a bad lens, and Vaseline got smeared on it. And the Spitzer, and then you take a look at Webb, and it's just like, oh my God. The difference, friends, the difference is just spectacular. That link Scott is posting there for you will take you to a video that will show you these things live, and it is just stunning. I hope you'll take a look at it.
And I think I found the video about the jumping robot too. So
okay.
That.
Yeah, and there's a link in the end of the show notes that you can download from the Explore website. There's links to these things so you can learn more, and I hope some of you will do that. Let's go ahead and jump into the nucleotide bases found in the asteroids. And Scott and I were chatting before the show. One of the really interesting things you say, okay, and the little video we saw before the show, the scientist says, oh yes, we want a pristine sample. And you say, well, if you got a meteorite and you split it in half in sterile conditions and you're looking inside the meteorite and you're saying, ooh, look, I found these nucleotide bases. This is not convincing to some folks. Some folks say, well, yeah, but it lands on the ground, in the dirt, in the ice, in the snow, in the sand. And so, of course, there's biology everywhere on the surface of the Earth, literally everywhere. The Atacama Desert, the worst environment on Earth, literally. And you scrape the varnish off the rocks, and it's a biological varnish. There's microorganisms there. So life contaminates, and you're like, ooh, well, do these biomolecules get deposited? And you have this image of a wasp with an ovipositor laying its parasitic wasp laying its egg in a moth. And you go, well, suffice it to say that without a pristine sample, some people will not be convinced. I will make a prediction, Scott.
Okay.
And this is a Thomas Kuhn, Scientific Revolutions, Karl Popper sort of prediction. I'm going to say that when we get material back from Bennu, we will crack open those samples, and it's rich in organics. We're going to find all kinds of crazy organic things. And there's going to be a section of the scientific community that could have been contaminated. How do we know the sample container was really, really clean? And how there's going to be people who will not be convinced. And I'm reminded of the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still, where the alien lands and he says, look, you've got to be nice. And they say, kill him. And he has the giant robot wipe out all the tanks and the soldiers. There are some people who will not be convinced if the literal little green man lands in their backyard and says, come on, I'll take you for a ride. Moon, Mars, sure. Got the space drive. Let's go, just for fun. Here's your helmet. There were people who would get back and say, I want to know what kind of drugs those were because I want to take them again.
Yeah.
Because obviously that wasn't true. There are some people, and I think they're in the Pope Urban VIII, they're in the Bernardo Gui in the Inquisition camp with Galileo. Bernardo Gui, the cardinal from the Inquisition, looked through Galileo's telescope and said, I see it, but I don't believe it.
Yeah.
There are some people for whom there isn't enough data. That's okay. Science, like a steamroller, rolls over you. Do you remember, friends, the scene from A Fish Called Wanda, where at the very end, the guy is hip deep in concrete and the steamroller rolls over him and he sits back up in the concrete? Yuck. Yeah, there are some people, well, the steamroller of science will roll over you. It may not be in my lifetime, but it will happen. Anyway, there we go. We're bringing in a lot of multicultural images here, Scott.
That's right.
So let's take you back to high school biology a little bit. Let's take everybody back, and we want to just lay some groundwork here. So those of you who are hyperventilating, high school science.
No.
Trust your old pal Doc. This isn't going to be bad. This is going to be okie dokie. So let's share a screen and talk about some stuff. So it turns out in the entire genetic code, and this is part of the genius of Watson and Crick, and Linus Pauling, for that matter, there are only 5 molecules that code for all the biological proteins, substances, enzymes, structures, everything, all life on Earth is coded in every strand of DNA from the most primitive cyanobacteria to algae to plants to fish, fungi, animals, people. We're all related. There's only 5 nucleotides that form the code, and the code is universal across all life from Earth, and it codes for all biomolecules and structures. Cytosine, thymine, adenine, guanine, uracil. Scary names, forget them. Don't worry about it. It's just C, T, A, G, and U. Those 5 letters, how big an alphabet? People asked this in the middle of the 20th century. Well, if there really is a molecule, and many people suspected DNA, that coded for all life, and it had to have some kind of code, the question was, how many letters do you have to have in a code to code for all of life? Because we knew DNA occurred in all life. We knew this a long time before we knew the structure of DNA. We knew this was in cells from the 1920s, and every cell we tested, wow, this stuff is still there. Only 5 molecules, only 5 letters in the code. And so these things are the code, and we have the double helix. Remember, everybody probably remembers this lesson from biology. DNA is a double helix. And the ladder that strings between are 2 molecules. And it's always A and T and G and C, and the 2 don't pair with each other. And why do they do that? Why do they do that? Well, it turns out DNA is lovely. It's this mirror image, if you will, right? Since A always bonds to G, whenever you have A on one side, you have G on the other. And you go, okay, these 2 bond together. And whenever you have C and T, they bond together, and the other 2 don't bond with each other. And so when you unzip the DNA molecule, when you peel it apart, you can take other things in the environment, and they're like Legos that only stick to certain Legos. And some shapes only stick to others. And when you have half of it, you can easily reassemble it from materials that are lying around. This is the idea of a self-replicating molecule. People knew for a long time before Watson and Crick, that there must be some kind of molecule that can reproduce itself. This molecule has to code for all the things necessary in a cell, in an organism, whether you're talking about primitive bacteria or a highly advanced animal, mammal, fish, bird. It somehow has to have a molecule that can unzip, reproduce itself, because otherwise, how do you get the next generation? How does a cod go and fertilize eggs from another cod? It won't work. If the cod tries to fertilize eggs from an octopus, it won't work. So how does a cod fertilize eggs from another cod and they make a little cod? How do you have sexual reproduction? You have to have a molecule that comes apart, and you can make copies, and you pass the copies along to the offspring. And this is the miracle of DNA and RNA. And that's a really simplified 5-minute version. Okay. If you want to know more about this, I put a link in the show notes to John D. Watson's beautiful, wonderful book, The Double Helix. It's an easy read. Highly recommended to everybody, friends. It's great stuff. We go ahead and we look at this and we realize, oh, all right, we've got this framework. And it is the framework and the ladder, the frame of the ladder, the outside of the ladder is made of ribonucleic acids. That's why we call it DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. And the acid pairs with a base. The bases are the 5 A, T, G, C, and U. And we take a look at this and we go, oh, okay. So we only have 5 letters in our magic alphabet. We can arrange them in a package that unzips. And because it only assembles a certain way, you can reassemble the unzipped part from stuff in the environment. Wow. A molecule that can reproduce itself. This is technically called a von Neumann machine. And any fans of Arthur C. Clarke and the 2001 and 2010 series of books, and they talk about, and you see this, I believe it's in the 2010 film. You have little molecules which fall into the planet Jupiter, and they're reproducing themselves, and they cause Jupiter to collapse and form a star. And they get the message from space, oh, everything in the solar system is yours except Europa. That's ours, no touchy. And it's a beautiful end to the movie. Do you remember that film, Scott? Have you seen that one?
No.
Okay. It's an old movie, so it's probably not on Netflix, but it's absolutely on Amazon. And if it's not in your DVD collection, it should be, friends. Go thou and watch. Awesome. So we have this self-replicating.
Wait. You're talking about 2001?
Sorry?
Are you talking about 2001 or 2010?
No, 2010.
20. I have seen it. I remember now. Yes.
And you see in the end, it looks like there's a black spot on Jupiter, and it starts. Yeah,
right. And everything's sucking into it.
Everything's sucking into it, and you think, oh, black hole, but then no, it ignites and becomes a star. And we've often heard Jupiter could have been a star, but it was a little bigger. It would have had a little more compression. Well, the aliens in 2001 and 2010 find a way to compress Jupiter to make a new star. Woo-hoo. I'm not sure that I would want to be on a planet as close to a star as Europa is to Jupiter. I think that would be really unpleasant. But there we go. So here we go. We have our little biology lesson. I'm sure this is just a refresher because our audience is really smart, Scott. I'm sure this is just a refresher. So we've got this molecule. So what, Doc? Well, so where the hell do you get the nucleotides? Yeah. Okay, these nucleic bases, these nucleotide bases, are not simple molecules. And people have said for a long time, well, this is the argument. I believe it's the ontological argument for God. Well, life is too complex. It must have been designed. It could not have just happened. And we see this argument of deity from complexity. There's too much evidence for a designer because it's too complex not to be designed. But then I'm going to throw Arthur C. Clarke back at you. Any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. And I'm absolutely certain that if I took my smartphone back 50 years ago, just 50 years ago, and I took it back and I showed it to Commander Scott and the crew of Apollo 17, and I said, hey guys, look what I've got. It's a radio, it's a telephone, it's a calculator, it's a computer, it's a movie camera, it's a movie projector, and it's basically the Library of Alexandria because you can find anything you want to. You can find about anything you want. If the knowledge exists, this machine, it doesn't hold it, but it has access to it. Even if they took it apart, they couldn't understand it. And it would just be, wow, it would be space alien stuff. So now we come to one of my favorites, the Autobiogenesis Theory. This is a theory that says there's the big theory and the small theory. It's like general and special relativity. The general self-assembly theory says that although the second law of thermodynamics wins eventually, everything wears out, everything breaks, everything cools off, the universe ends in a heat death with just very low frequency radiation and dead particles, and everything dies. It's the ultimate bummer. It's Kafka and the cockroach story. It's everything depressing. This is terrible. Everything dies. Autosynthesis says, well, yes, entropy wins globally and eventually, but in local areas, in small local areas, you can have processes that are anti-entropic, and they are in fact self-assembling. For a long time, we didn't understand this. And we started to understand that stars were self-assembling about a century ago. We had this idea, actually, it's almost 3 centuries old. It goes back to, I believe it's Levant. It's a French fellow. I'm drawing a blank on the name, sorry. But he said basically, oh yes, the nebular theory. And he said it was Laplace. I'm grasping at straws, sorry. It's Laplace. He's French. Okay. So, yeah, Americans would say Laplace.
Laplace, that's right. You're America.
You're America. Mr. Laplace, nice to meet you. No, monsieur, it's Laplace. Anyway,
yes.
Sorry to all our French-speaking audience. I'm massacring it. Please accept my apologies. Anyway, yes. Mr. Laplace said, oh, these clouds, they would compress because gravity, and they would form stars. Laplace is the very first person who is known to have brought up and fully developed this idea of self-assembly of stars. He did it in the late 1700s. Okay, stars are self-assembling. When Scott and I were young, and dinosaurs roamed the earth a long time ago, right. We were both taught life is extremely, extremely rare.
Yes.
Planets are really, really rare. Planets form when stars pass very close to one another randomly, and some materials tears off from the star, and it coagulates and it forms planets. And only on a very tiny portion of the planets will life originate. And so planets are really rare. Life is really rare. We're probably the only planet. There's probably maybe 10 or 20 planets in the whole galaxy or stars in the whole galaxy that have planets, and we're probably the only one that has life. Isn't this essentially, Scott, what you were taught when you were young?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, basically.
I mean, it was just a miracle that life is here. Although
exactly.
I will say it's miraculous, of course, but still, nevertheless,
yeah,
it's probably also miraculous that it's probably exists everywhere,
I have a real problem with the people who say, oh, there's this division between religion and science. And I'm like, how can, and don't study, I was told in Catholic school, we're concerned about you studying too much science. It would take you away from,
Really?
I'm like, but wait
Is
a
that
minute.
true?
How can studying the creation ruin your faith in the creator?
Right?
Could you look at Da Vinci's paintings and become convinced by studying them that Da Vinci didn't exist? It's just a silly idea. Anyway, back to Laplace, stars self-assemble. We've come to understand in about the last century that planets self-assemble. And although this idea goes back quite a bit, we didn't have a lot of evidence for this until 1980s. We started to acquire more evidence, and we started to discover exoplanets. And then we took the Kepler mission, we put a satellite up there. Here, stare at this one space, this one little tiny area of the sky. And what, it lasted 3 years and found 4,000 exoplanets candidates. It's like, oh my God, they're everywhere. It's like you flip on a light in the middle of the night in an old tenement and roaches. Oh my God, they're everywhere. Why didn't I see them during the day? Because I wasn't looking for them. So we now have a more informed idea. Planets self-assemble around stars. You had population 3 stars, the really, really old ones, very pure clouds of hydrogen and helium. They made stars which were very hot, burned very fast, and went bang very quickly. They synthesized new atoms. Mm-hmm. We had nucleosynthesis. They went bang and they splattered these things out. The next population 2 and now the current generation population 1, we're born from a dirty, contaminated cloud of hydrogen and helium that has icky contamination of metals in it because the stars, the early pop 3 stars, didn't clean up after themselves. Well, these things allow dust grains to form and planets to form and terrestrial planets with actual surfaces on them, as opposed to gas giants and ice giants with no real surface that's in any way, shape, or form habitable. So we have terrestrial planets, and we know that they self-assemble. We basically understand now that when a star forms, it makes planets around itself the same way a child forms fingers and toes in the womb. It's a process that's automatic unless something goes very terribly wrong. And current estimates in a galaxy of 100 billion suns like the Milky Way, 1 to 500 billion, there must be some tens of trillions, if not more, planets. And if we go down to little ones like Pluto, the fun size, or dwarf planets, as some people say, there must be hundreds of trillions of these sorts of bodies. Wow. Okay. Well, so we know stars, planets, black holes self-assemble. There's research now which suggests dark matter in the early universe would have spontaneously been dense enough to collapse to form black holes without all the messy and time-consuming step. It sounds like a new cleaning product. Form black holes without all the time-consuming method of forming stars that go bang. Why have messy clouds of debris? Form your black holes directly from dark matter with our new product. And they're like, wow, that's how we think galaxies form so quickly, because black holes as the seed and core of galaxies seem to be essential. We know that once you get a planet, we know that if it's big enough, pressure internally. Pressure creates heat. All this, gravity is the fountain of creation, friends. Gravity creates pressure creates heat. Heat drives chemical reactions. Radioactive materials in the interior of planets, they do indeed radiate outward, but the energy is trapped and becomes heat, raises the temperature. Now we get the interior is plastic, is molten. Now planets differentiate. The lightweight stuff like granite floats to the surface, becomes continents, and the really heaviest stuff, nickel and iron, fall into the core, and the midweight stuff forms the mantle. If you have enough heat, you get plate tectonics. All of this is automatic. It doesn't require stirring. It doesn't require it doesn't even require the simple nonverbal directions on the backs of a box of brownies, where they show pictures of egg and oil and milk and a spoon. You don't even have to have the illiterate directions on the back of a box of brownies. These things themselves are driven. The self-assembly process is there inherently in the design, if you will, of the atoms themselves. Atoms, gravitation, nuclear synthesis, all these things are pre-programmed, and hydrogen, ultimately, I think there's a line from Sherlock Holmes. Watson, if I was the ideal reasoner people say I am, I could look at a drop of water and predict a Niagara, an Atlantic, but I cannot. Well, we look at hydrogen, one proton, one electron, and hydrogen contains within it the seeds of whole galaxies, planets, and life. And the big self-assembly theory, the general theory, says the whole universe, the greatest miracle in creation is that the whole damn thing is self-assembly. And then the religious people say, well, who designed hydrogen? And so we're not going to get into that debate. We'll leave that as an exercise for the audience.
We don't quite have that one.
But this self-assembly is essentially anti-entropic. You have this high entropy cloud of hydrogen gas, and after a few million years, add gravity, and now you have this very nice organized star. You have this dirty, messy cloud that's even more highly entropic because it has icky particles in it from nuclear synthesis and supernovae explosions. Bang! And it self-assembles into different kinds of planets. Well, we look out in the universe, and Webb shows us, by peering through the dusty veil to see the process as it happens, it says, you know what? Self-assembly happens everywhere. Everywhere in the universe, these little anti-entropic processes are common. They happen all the time. Wow. To me, friends, this is just, it's just stunning. It is, for me, the most stunning lesson of astrophysics and astronomy. The whole damn thing is self-assembly. It's stunning. Well, then we get to the strong self-assembly argument, if you will, or the special self-assembly argument. And it says, you know what? Life is no different inherently. Making a cell is inherently no different than making a planet. Life self-assembles. Life self-assembles, so anywhere you have enough, and we talked about this a couple of shows ago, we go, wow, we're seeing fossils that date back within 100 or 200 million years of the continents actually becoming solid. We have lava planet, eruptions everywhere. The granite floats to the top, it solidifies. Look, the granite kind of floats to the top and emerges from a sea of lava and becomes a continental surface. And within 100 to 200 million years, you get biological communities forming filaments, leaving fossils. And again, there are people who argue with this, but I could say the sky is blue. I'm sure we could find people to argue that. And so I've given you that data. So you should be a good audience and research, dig into these things and come up with your own ideas.
That's right.
But the thing about anti-entropic processes, yes, they all use energy. Yes, they all consume resources. Yes, eventually you put bacteria in a, you go ahead and you put starter culture in your milk to make yogurt. Eventually the bacteria there use up all the supplies and they die and you eat the yogurt. And later on, you go to the bathroom and that's where the yogurt goes. Boom. You could say the same thing of making wine, fermented foods of any kind. Well, you know what? The fermentation stops when the bacteria run out. And so you say, oh yes, anti-entropic processes all have their limits. They all stop eventually. But solar systems, planets, contain a hell of a bunch of resources.
Yes.
It's just really big. You go out, friends, next time you look at the Orion Nebula. Ooh, how big is that darn thing? 30, 35 light years wide, something like that? And people argue about how big it actually is. But how many solar masses of stuff are in the Orion Nebula? And you figure each one of those stars is capable of making a solar system that will last 5 to 10 billion years. And that's an awful lot of time on an awful lot of planets for an awful lot of processes to occur before the resources run out.
Sure.
And we see places. If you go look at the Orion Nebula, and then you look at the Pleiades, and this works best earlier in the spring or late in winter, and then you go look at the double cluster, and you're seeing, here's a young star-forming region. In Orion, you're seeing an older, more mature star-forming region where there's just wispy traces of gas which are being irradiated and fluorescing in the Pleiades. And then you look at the double cluster and you say, here's one where all the stars have been made. But whatever processes are going on in the planets around those stars will continue for many billions of years. So we look at this and people say, well, nucleotide bases are too complex for self-assembly. I've heard this from very learned and relatively ignorant people, but the argument is the same. It comes down to, the eye is too complex a structure to have happened from random steps in evolution. And so we have to have a creator over here to make the eye over there. So the idea that this is too complex not to have a designer. Okay. But the discovery of all 5 bases in meteoric material, and the last 2, we had 3 but not 2, and people said, there you go, there's the crack where the creator must enter. You haven't found the last 2, and now we found all of them. Well, what does this mean? Where did they come from? And let's just throw out the uber ultra double skeptical with a cherry on top argument that, a microbe penetrated all the way inside of a sizable meteorite and contaminated it before a scientist could grab it. And let's just say the inside of rocks are the inside of rocks.
Okay.
And a lot of these meteorites have a fusion crust. In other words, the outside has been sealed shut like a shrink wrap plastic. It's heated, it's melted. Okay. If we just throw that argument aside, as in there is nothing that will make you happy, well, if these biomolecules did indeed arrive on Earth inside the meteorites, and I think for most of the really skeptical people, the asteroid Bennu material will satisfy those questions in the next 5 to 10 years. And they're not going to study all of it. Just this last week, they had an announcement from NASA. Guess what? We're opening up some of the reserved Apollo 17 samples.
Yeah, it hasn't been open in 50 years.
Hasn't
right?
been. It's been in deep freeze, untouched for a half a century.
Yeah,
Why?
since it left the moon.
We didn't have the instruments. We didn't have the intelligence to even ask. We didn't. It's not we didn't have the intelligence. We did. What we didn't have was the special knowledge to ask the really probing questions, because you have to, it's like a telescope. I say this all the time. The more knowledge you bring to an eyepiece, the more value you take away from it. The same thing is true of science. The more knowledge you bring to a scientific investigation, the more you take away from it. Einstein himself said, we can tell really smart people by the quality of the questions they ask, not the results they get. Because you can ask really good questions and nature says, no. So, but Einstein said, people who ask really good questions, they must be really clever people. Well, let's just make the assumption for going on with, because the sample container from Bennu isn't here yet. And I'm like the person in the, in the Christmas commercial for the store who said, open, 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 waiting for it because I wanted to be here. But let's just assume that those things arrived on Earth inside the asteroids. Where did they come from, Scott? Where did they come from? Well, these things had to have self-assembled in space on grains of dust orbiting our sun. And in that very cold environment, once the grains are self-assembled into an asteroid or a meteoroid, and then it becomes a meteor, and then it becomes a chunk of meteorite. Well, these things had to self-assemble on these dust grains orbiting our star and then be preserved in this locked inside, I believe, locked inside Bennu and innumerable other asteroids and meteoroids. There are biomolecules that have self-assembled on the grains from which these big spaceborne objects were made. How did they get the energy? Hello, radiation, right? Heat,
Yep.
UV,
Plenty of that.
gamma, and we know that plants rely on UV. Why don't plants get sunburned? Because they use UV in photosynthesis. It's their energy source. So these, you pick up, we talked about this at the chat at the beginning of the show too. Friends, if you have a meteorite sample, you hold in your hand something that most likely predates the assembly of Earth. It's going to be about 5 billion years old. And yes, we can go ahead. These things date from the ignition of the sun. They're about the oldest things you can find, and hold in your very grimy paws is a chunk of meteorite. And so could they self-assemble? Where could they come from? We've been probing this idea for more than 70 years as well. About 1952, 70 years ago, Stanley Miller, who was a student at the time, and Harold Urey, who was his professor at the University of Chicago, and Stanley Miller said, what would the early Earth's atmosphere have been like? Not like now, where we have nice oxygen to breathe, but it would have had nitrogen, it would have had hydrogen, it would have had ammonia, it would have had methane, water vapor. Pretty sure it probably would have had carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide from volcanoes as well. But they said, let's just take the things we're sure of. Let's put them in a flask. Let's put a couple of electrodes and make it go to simulate lightning. And that's our energy source. And let's see what happened. Well, within a couple of days, this nice, clear, gaseous mixture, you started to see orange and then red and then brown and then blackish, sludgy material coating the inside of the vessel. And they let it go, and they found, gee, all the amino acids are there. All the basic building blocks for proteins are there. Some of the nucleotides were there. And they kept samples, just like the Apollo mission. They kept samples of the original Miller-Urey experiment.
Oh, wow. So they still
and
have
they've reanalyzed them in the last couple of years. And they go, there's a lot more stuff in here than those guys thought, because their sampling and detection equipment was not as accurate and as refined as something we have today. We have 70-year-on better technology now. And so we find that, these things can self-assemble. You just have to have an energy source and the right basic molecules. Do we know water vapor exists in stellar clouds? Yes. Ammonia, yes. Alcohols, yes. Carbon dioxide, yes. Nitrogen, yes. Sulfur. We know all these things. Spectrographic studies show that these things exist in the dusty halo around new stars. There are literally clouds of these molecules out into space. And so, wow. Even if you say life doesn't self-assemble on Earth, the building blocks appear to neatly self-assemble, thank you very much, in the deep space environment of dusty grains, microscopic grains. On the surface of these grains these surfaces form basically an enzymatic surface, which allows molecules to stick and interact more readily than they would if they were just drifting past each other in a zero gravity environment. And so we see this self-assembly appears to go on in space. The self-assembly of biomolecules predates by at least 500 million years the formation of the Earth. This kind of argues that all the pieces that made Earth probably contained these biomolecules. We didn't have to build the Earth and then, ooh, look, an asteroid with a biomolecule in it. You realize the Earth was assembled by accretion. They had the heavy bombardment period and all these things. The Earth is made of asteroids and comets that all went smack and stuck together. By all we know now, all of the pieces that made up the Earth were contaminated, I say, with biomolecules like nucleotide bases and amino acids and all the little pieces you need. And so people ask the question, well, how did life arise from a puddle? How did self-replicating molecules assemble in this puddle? And they make the presumption that the puddle was sterile, the Earth was lifeless. Mars is lifeless. You people, I'm talking to you right now. And they say, oh, it would have been a sterile planet, and then suddenly, zap, said the finger of God, Harry Potter's wand, whatever you want to, and ooh, we have biomolecules, and then ooh, zap again, and they self-assemble into self-replicating units. And frankly, friends, it doesn't look like we need Harry Potter or his wand after all. Harry Potter can keep his wand. The whole bloody planet, friends, was made of pieces, which, if they're like virtually every other meteorite we've ever sampled, and I think if they're like what I'm predicting here now, this is predicting hypotheses from data. I think we're going to find all sorts of really cool biomolecules in the Bennu sample. And I think if we sent someone to Bennu, we talked, Scott, about how there are grains of calcite materials that were formed in warm water environments. And some of them are like, holy cow, 15 centimeters, 6 inches in diameter. So you're talking like a big sewer pipe, right?
Yes.
And you're talking, wow, these big veins, sometimes meters long, that we've seen on Bennu. I think if we sent someone to go, ooh, let's sample here, boots on the ground. Could we make a robot that was that good? Those folks at NASA and ESA and JAXA and the DLR are really smart. I have no doubt that's something that somebody right now is, I don't know if they're watching our program, but I believe there's somebody working on something cool like that right now and wanting to write this proposal to get it funded. Ooh, look at the next decadal survey. I'm going to submit my proposal. I would be willing to bet there are people submitting proposals right now. And if you're in the audience, love to talk to you. Love to have you on the show as a guest.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Wow.
So we have some comments and questions. We should probably cover these. We had nice audience participation today, so thank you very much. Mike Wiesner makes a comment. He says, I began loving asteroids when I worked on the Indiana University asteroid program as an astrophysics undergrad in 66 through 1970. Let's see. We got Buck says lots of laughs, planetary scale blowing chunks. There's a mind picture. Let's see. Harold Locke says, how do things float around and not get stuck on the sides of the universe? Okay, that's kind of going out there, but Buck's answer was, there are no sides. Okay, so. And Harold says, that makes sense, Buck, but okay.
They do get stuck on the surface of dust grains. That's the whole point. They get stuck on the surface of dust grains, and that's where this brilliant chemistry happens. We have basically surfaces that function like enzymes. They collect molecules and let them interact.
Lots of dust. Harold Locke says, I've seen it theorized that the gravitational nature of the universe has a surface tension just like water that keeps the individual universes in the multiverse together. I don't know. Okay.
My audience reminds me that I am never too far out. Okay. I'm really a scientific conservative, friends, as the audience shows you every week.
Buck says, isn't it strange that the universe seems endlessly creative, yet entropy is? Um, okay, let's move on. I let's see. We got into some of the God questions here, which is always
I
interesting.
will leave those as an exercise for the audience.
Yes, that's right. Um, Pekka Hautala says, "Has there ever fallen a meteorite to Earth's surface that has some amount of radioactive radiation of any kind?"
Sure, sure. Because we take these meteorites and we use radio dating, radioisotope dating. And so these things contain molecules and elements and compounds which are radioactive but very long half-lives. So thorium, potassium, and some others where we can see and radio date them. That's how we can tell these things are 4 to 5 billion years old, is because there are radioisotopes in there that we can measure the isotope ratios and arrive at an age. And we realize that this clock starts ticking once the piece solidifies. And we look at these radioisotope ratios, and we know that things like uranium decay into certain things. And so we look at the ratio of how much uranium, how much lead, thorium, other things that in the decay sequence. And this is out of my area of expertise, friends. I'm speaking from general knowledge. But yes, indeed, Becca, there are radioisotopes in every asteroid. And they're not like Geiger counter hot, but they are there and they can be measured, and that's how we date them.
Cool. This got off topic, but question nonetheless. Estefan wanted to know what your thoughts were about the Tic Tac and UAP UFO footage that was released by the Navy and perhaps
I'm quite certain there's life all over in the universe. I'm not. I have seen no evidence that convinces me that anyone has visited yet. And the immense distances involved in interstellar travel convinced me that it would have to be a heck of a big ship just to have enough peanut butter, crackers, and 7-Up to get you the whole way. Just the resources you would have to bring for interstellar travel, you couldn't do it in a minivan. Okay, you'd have to have something really, really big. And since we can easily with radar, we can track things smaller than a ping pong ball that are in orbit. If something that big came into our solar system, we would pick it up.
Yes.
We would pick it up. We picked up Umama, right? I'm probably saying that badly. It's a Hawaiian name, but the long cigar-shaped asteroid that we realized was an interstellar visitor,
right?
And it was some kilometers long, but and rendezvous with Rama, anyone? Yeah, if we have something that big, it's absolutely within our power to detect. We detect comets out beyond the orbit of Neptune that are 50 kilometers wide, and certainly you would need a ship, I would imagine, substantially larger than that. And it would be a generational spacecraft. Wow. We're setting off, and this trip is going to take us 1,000 years. And so the people who launch are not the people who arrive. And wow, take a look at The Earth is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky. I think that's a Harlan Ellison story. I may be getting the title wrong, but yeah. I don't see any data that convinces me we've been visited. I'm absolutely convinced statistically that life is out there. I don't see data that tells me we've detected any yet. There's some, but it's like one dot on the graph. I don't see enough data to convince me that my interpretation is correct.
Evidence.
Yes. I believe, but I cannot prove or demonstrate. I don't have the data. So I don't know if that's satisfactory or not. But there you go.
Right. Let's see. More questions. Hmm? Lots of conversation between the viewers, which is
Between
great.
audience members. That's what's cool. There's always
That's
a
cool.
lively chat
Yeah. There was
between
some
all of our
conversation
audience.
about social media, and why people look at Facebook versus YouTube and vice versa. Um, Pavel Lech says Orion Nebula is my favorite nebula on winter nights. This nebula is a spectacular home of the birth of stars.
Yes,
Yes, it is.
yes. As an astronomy teacher, fall semester, I always eagerly await the appearance of Orion in the evening sky late in the semester, and I love to take students out and show them the Orion Nebula and the Orion, the Pleiades, and the double cluster, and look at these and talk about, oh, we can't see the passage of time, but we can see things at different points along a timeline. And Webb is going to help us see a lot more dots on that timeline that were just too blurry and too fuzzy. You took a look at that little image we had at the beginning of the Wise and the Spitzer and Webb. Webb is awesome. Webb is awesome. We're gonna
Yes.
see so many cool things over the
Yes, we
next
are.
couple of decades. Stunning
Um,
stuff.
Pekka says, I'm sure there is stuff out there that's beyond our understanding and what we believe can be made. Well,
I
that's
would agree.
probably true.
I would agree.
Yep. Edward Murray says, are you guys doing anything online for the eclipse on Sunday? We have not announced anything yet.
Going to be in my
We have some
backyard.
volunteers out there that would like for me to stream a program, then get in touch with me. You know how to do that, but I'll just go ahead and put my email address. It just is the letter S at explorescientific.com.
Indeed.
And I would be happy to stream that for our audience wherever you are. Okay.
If you are you going to do that at the Explore store?
Again, we have not had anything planned here.
We
are
could
very
do it at
busy
the
right now,
world famous Barthland Ranch
anything,
and
including
observatory.
getting ready for making preparation, which doesn't happen until September, but we've got a couple of really big star parties coming up.
Yes.
The first one would be the Starmus event in Yerevan, Armenia. So if you're planning on following me halfway around the world to go to a major star party with rock stars and astrophysicist stars, please do so. Love to see you there in Armenia for Starmus. And you can go to starmus.com for that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Our weather for Northwest Arkansas is not particularly encouraging for Sunday. So
snow,
one of the things I really miss,
rain, and tornadoes, something like that.
Not quite, but 16% chance of rain and partly cloudy skies. So,
So I need.
That's one thing I really miss about the low
drier,
desert out in Riverside County, where I used to live.
Arizona, Texas, something.
Yeah, you could go up to Joshua Tree, and the weather is like clear and amazing all the time. But here we have to
down
play.
In the Southern Hemisphere. So we do have friends down in Southern Hemisphere, like Cesar Brolo, who might take us up on that. I will find out probably by Wednesday whether or not we would do a Sunday program. So
that'd be fun.
Yeah. But anyways, we want to thank you all for watching today. And, if you have any questions, please get in touch with us. We're happy to help you. Until then, we will see you tomorrow for Global Star Party number 93. So, which is collisions and creation. And so Daniel Barth is rejoining us for that. So
I will.
There we go. Okay, so that's
Looking
it
forward to it.
for today. And don't forget to look for Dr. Daniel Barth's book, which is being advertised next. So
Yes. I will happily inform our audience as soon as they say production is complete. We're sending out copies. I keep checking for that email, like
it's not there yet.
no joy yet. And it's publishing is a black box. You send off something and then you wait, and poof, and one day it magically appears. So I will let our audience know. I know many of you have pre-ordered, and thank you. And I'm very excited to see a copy of it in hand as well. And we have plans for a giveaway for program 50, and we're hoping that the publisher will come through by that time. They're supposed to. They've told me that they've said you should have your copies around May 20. And so I'm like, okay, that's about 10 days from now. So maybe that's the first I will know. It's when a box shows up in my mailbox. I have no idea, but as soon as I know, you'll know. And thank you all.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So that's today's program. You guys keep looking up. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.